Somewhere in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans, there was a housing project built on a drained swamp, boxed in by a canal, a rail line, and two roads out. 13,000 people lived there, and by the 1990s, its murder rate was 5 times higher than the city around it. Across the country, these places were built as promises: new apartments, working plumbing, courtyards, schools. Some became gang territory. Some became open-air drug markets. Some were raided with armored vehicles. Some were demolished so completely that almost nothing is left but grass. Here is what nobody wants to acknowledge about the American Housing Project. These were not old slums the government failed to fix. Many were brand new places the government built on purpose. And in city after city, the same promise broke. So let's talk about 10 U.S. housing projects that became gang war zones. And we are starting with the first one America ever built. Techwood Homes, Atlanta, Georgia. This one matters because it was first. The first public housing project in the entire United States. Opened in 1936, dedicated by President Franklin Roosevelt himself. The model. The blueprint every city that followed would copy. And look at how the blueprint was drawn. To build Techwood, they bulldozed a poor, racially mixed neighborhood and put up housing that only white families were allowed to have. And only white families who could clear an income bar the people they had just evicted could not reach. The very first brick of American public housing was laid on top of somebody else's erased home. For decades, Washington starved it of upkeep money, and by the mid-90s, Techwood was drug market territory, gang turf, its buildings almost entirely empty, a place city officials openly said you would not drive through. The irony you can't make up. Coca-Cola's world headquarters sat directly across the street, quietly lobbying to have it wiped away. When Atlanta won the 1996 Olympics, the city finally had its reason. The first housing project in America became one of the first to vanish. Where it stood, there are townhomes and clipped green lawns now, and almost none of the original families ever made it back onto them. Number 9, the Magnolia Projects. Central City, New Orleans. Locals just called it Nolia. On paper, 1,400 units. On the street, the highest murder rate of any project in a city that in 1 year killed people at roughly 8 times the rate of New York. Not the deadliest block in New Orleans, the deadliest block in the deadliest city. Turf war shootings, drug corners run building by building all through the 90s. But here's what the crime map will never tell you. That exact stretch of crack pavement is one of the birthplaces of an entire sound. Cash Money Records came out of the Magnolia. The label was founded by men from these bricks, and the artists who made it famous were Nolia kids. So the same ground the city couldn't wait to demolish was, at that very moment, exporting music the whole world would end up copying. They tore it down after Katrina and gave the replacement a soft, hopeful name, Harmony Oaks, as if a name could cover what the ground remembers. Number 8, Jordan Downs, Watts, Los Angeles. To understand Jordan Downs, you have to go back to August 1965, when Watts erupted for 6 days and the whole country watched South Los Angeles burn. These low-slung rows of units sat right in the middle of it. And in the decades after, Jordan Downs became something close to sovereign territory for one of the most notorious gangs in America. The Grape Street Crips took their name from the street that runs through it, and for years they didn't just live there, they ran it. Here's the piece that turns your stomach. The buildings were thrown up on a former industrial site, and the soil underneath was later found to be laced with dangerous levels of lead and arsenic. That meant families were raising children on poisoned ground for decades without being told. Gang war above, contamination below. The city is finally redeveloping it now, tearing down the old blocks for new mixed income housing, digging out the toxic dirt. But ask anyone from Watts, and they'll tell you the name Grape Street still means something you don't say lightly. Number 7, Nickerson Gardens. Watts, Los Angeles, a few blocks from Jordan Downs, sits the largest public housing development west of the Mississippi River, over 1,000 units, more than a small town's worth of people. And where Jordan Downs was Crip territory, Nickerson Gardens was the opposite corner, the stronghold of the bounty hunter Bloods, one of the most feared sets in the country. Two enormous projects, blocks apart, in the same square mile of Watts, flying opposite colors, and a generation of kids grew up learning which streets they could walk on and which streets would get them killed for the crime of living on the wrong side of an invisible line. Murals of the dead cover the walls. Today, the housing authority still owns it, families still live there, and is still standing, one of the few on this whole list that was never torn down. The line's still there too, you just can't see it. Number 6. The Queensbridge Houses, Long Island City, Queens, New York. The largest housing project in all of North America. 26 buildings, thousands upon thousands of people, in the shadow of the bridge it's named for. And when the crack epidemic hit New York in the 80s, Queensbridge became one of its bloodiest fronts. The drug economy and the violence that rolled with it tore through those courtyards for years. But here's the thing the rest of the country came to know Queensbridge for. That project produced one of the deepest benches of talent in the history of American music. Nas grew up in these buildings and wrote an album about them that people still call one of the greatest ever made. Mobb Deep, Marley Marl, a whole lineage came out of that concrete. Queensbridge is still standing, still full of families, and the songs written there did what no demolition ever could. They made the place permanent. If you're going to thank me for anything today, thank you for still being here. A subscribe genuinely keeps these going, and it's free. That's the whole ask. Now, back to it. Number 5, the Marcy Houses. Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. 27 buildings, 6 stories each, thousands of residents, and to the world, one address in particular. This is where Jay-Z grew up. That's how most people know Marcy. As a lyric, an origin story. The place a kid became one of the richest artists on earth, but the Marcy he wrote about was a war zone in the plainest sense. During the crack years, the buildings ran around-the-clock drug trade, and the violence that came with it was constant enough that residents learned the sound of gunfire the way other neighborhoods learned traffic. He has said flatly that he sold drugs in that courtyard as a teenager, that friends died young, that the place that made him nearly killed him. And here is the quiet, brutal irony of Marcy. The man who escaped it became a billionaire, and Marcy is still standing, still public housing, still full of families waiting on the same escape that almost never comes twice. Number 4, Pruitt Ego, St. Louis, Missouri. This is the textbook one. The collapse so total, it became the picture in every book about how public housing fails. 33 towers, 11 stories each, 15,000 people. When it opened in 1954, the magazines called it a marvel, and the people moving in remember something almost tender, working plumbing for the first time in their lives, the smell of cooking in the hallways. One woman called her apartment a poor man's penthouse. That's how it started. Here's the flaw poured straight into the concrete. To save money, the elevators only stopped every 3rd floor, forcing thousands of people into the stairwells, and the stairwells, cut off and unwatched, became the property of whoever was willing to hurt you inside them. Residents had a name for the galleries. They called them gauntlets. You ran them to get home, and the money was rigged from day one. Washington paid to build the place but not to run it, so the upkeep came entirely out of the rent of the poorest people in the city. When St. Louis lost half its population, the rent vanished, the maintenance died, and the towers rotted with families still inside. By 1970, 2/3 of it stood empty, and dealers were running heroin through the abandoned units. So they wired the towers with dynamite and blew them up on live television, and people brought lawn chairs to watch. Today it's 57 acres of forest in the middle of the city, trees growing out of the footprint of a future nobody could afford to keep. Number 3. Cabrini Green, near North Side, Chicago. The name became the whole idea. When Americans pictured the projects, they pictured this: 15,000 people in towers, a few miles from the richest shopping in the Midwest, a place so heavy in the national imagination that Hollywood built a horror movie on top of it and called the monster Candyman. A place so frightening it became a ghost story. Except the real thing was worse than any movie. Gangs owned the high-rises floor by floor. The elevators did not work, so you climbed the stairwells past the lookouts. Snipers fired from the upper windows into the open ground below, and the children who lived there learned to drop flat the instant they heard a shot. As far back as 1970, 2 Chicago police officers were shot dead by a sniper firing out of one of the buildings. In 1981, the mayor of Chicago actually moved into Cabrini Green with a police escort to prove it could be tamed. She lasted 3 weeks. Nothing changed. And here's what the cameras never showed. To the people who lived there, it was still home. One woman who had spent 40 years inside, days after burying her own murdered son, told a reporter there was more love in that place than terror. That was true, and it still wasn't enough to save it. They spent 16 years pulling it down, tower by tower, and the last high-rise fell in 2011. The land is worth a fortune now. A Target, a Starbucks, million-dollar row houses standing exactly where the towers threw their shadows. Number 2. The Robert Taylor Homes, South Side, Chicago. For a while, the largest public housing project on planet Earth. 28 high-rises, 16 stories each, over 4,000 units, strung 2 miles straight down State Street, built for 11,000 people. It held 27,000, and it was walled off from the city on purpose. Expressways on one side, train tracks on the other, no grocery store, no bank, no library you could walk to, a holding pen with a skyline. Inside those towers, the gangster disciples didn't just deal, they governed. They decided which building you could enter, which elevator you could ride, whether you paid to walk into your own home. At one point, 95% of the adults there had no legal job, and yet the housing authority itself estimated tens of thousands of dollars in drug money moved through Robert Taylor every single day. Do the math. Millions a year flowing out of stairwells in a place where almost no one was employed. They throw bricks and bottles off the roofs that rival 16 floors below, and the things that came down killed children who happened to be standing there. The whole 2-mile wall of towers came down for the last time in 2007. Grass now, an empty scar where the biggest one ever built used to stand, and where for a generation a street gang ran a city inside the city. And number 1 is the Desire Projects, 9th Ward, New Orleans. That sealed off neighborhood across the water. Locals called it Dirty D, and it earned every letter. Start with the ground itself, because the cruelty is in the foundation. They built Desire on a drained swamp that had been used as a garbage dump. Homes for thousands of families stacked on top of a sinking landfill. Then they crowded it past the breaking point. By the 60s, more than 13,000 people were packed onto less than 100 acres, the densest patch of humanity in the entire city, and they cut it off from that city with a canal, a rail line, and just 2 roads in. No easy way out, no easy way for help to get in. Sealed off like that, it became a place the city could ignore. Drug crews controlled the barrack-style blocks. By the early 90s, the murder rate inside Desire ran 5 times higher than the rest of New Orleans, in a city that was already one of the deadliest in America. And the state knew what it had made. In 1970, police rolled up to Desire in buses behind an armored vehicle. And in one 20-minute stretch, they fired 30,000 rounds into the housing project, 30,000 bullets into the walls that families slept behind. That's not a raid. That's a government at war with the people it was supposed to be housing. They tore the last of Desire down in the late 90s. Go out there today, past the canal, out where most of the city still never goes, and you'll find something quieter than you'd expect. Low pastel townhomes, cut grass, a soft new name on the sign. It looks almost peaceful. It looks like nothing ever happened there. But the machine that built desire, that packed it, sealed it off, starved it, and finally opened fire on it, was never torn down. It's still out there, still deciding which neighborhoods get to exist. The towers came down. Nobody ever turned it off.